Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Zero Trust Security Managing a Complex Cloud Environment in the Public Sector webinar. Hashicorp Senior Solutions Engineer Tim Olson is going to discuss what Zero Trust Security means, the challenges and impact of multi-cloud security in the public sector, and how to enable scalable, dynamic security across clouds. I want to note that the webinar is recorded, and the recording will be made available after post-processing, usually within a few days. I'll email it out to all of you. The presentation will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll allow up to 15 minutes afterward for questions. Please submit your questions throughout the demo through the Q&A portal, then we'll answer them at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Take it away, Tim.
Thank you, Allison. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for joining today, and thank you for your time this afternoon as we go through and start exploring a little bit about Zero Trust Security, what that is, what it means, and how we can usually start looking at standing up and applying these types of solutions, especially in the ever-changing world of cloud and hybrid cloud and infrastructure and all the dynamics around that. So we'll step into that, take a look at that as we go through today. First off, for those who aren't that familiar with Hashicorp, real quick, this is what we are and what we do. We are a leading cloud infrastructure automation company. So you see over on the right a list of our family lineup. That is all the products that are offered by Hashicorp. Several of them are available in open source. That is our roots. That's where we came from. And there are four of the products, Terraform, Vault, Console, and Nomad, are also offered as enterprise-level solutions to give you additional functionality capability to address those enterprise needs. So we will walk through today, and we'll talk about what it is and Zero Trust and how we can move forward into adopting that type of a model. But first, let's talk a little about some of the challenges going on, right? Some of the capabilities and things that are happening out in the industry and in the public sector. And it's really this desire to migrate and adopt a cloud model or a cloud method, right? So we're all very familiar with the traditional or existing data center. Right, these are here. These are not going anywhere. They're still widely used, not only in the public sector and federal, but in commercial as well. But the traditional data center approach is very familiar. Right, we're all familiar with the environment that tend to have very static, well-established, long-lived resources. Right, networks, firewalls, everything within a data center is generally IP-based. Right, we establish a perimeter, we establish a security around it, and then we restrict physical access as well as traffic, et cetera, in and out of the data center. So we set our firewalls, we set our routers, everything to say who can come in, who can't go out, not only physically, but the IP packets, the traffic going in and out. Now we're looking at adopting new modern functionality, quote unquote. In other words, the more dynamic aspects of infrastructure, more dynamic aspects of resources, right? The cloud, the hybrid multi-cloud world. We move into saying, how do we adopt this more flexible, dynamic environment? Because we no longer are in a four-walled data center, right? We no longer have a set of predefined hardware or predefined infrastructure and resources that are out on the data center floor where I know where they are. We're now in a much more dynamic world, right? So everything within the modern data center, the hybrid multi-cloud world, is very dynamic. It's very on demand, right? It's very much ephemeral in nature. I can spin things up. I can spin things down. I can have short versus long-lived. I can do lots of different types of environments across multiple different providers to meet my differing needs. Right? And that's really where a lot of this comes from, is the ability to solve mission requirements and the ever-demanding capabilities there in a much more dynamic fashion. Right? So I can now provision things, I can now schedule services, I can rapidly deploy and solve different mission parameters based on a much more dynamic environment. So we're very used to how this comes together. We're used to the environment of the traditional data center, right? So, but we're now seeing the effects of this digital transformation, right? So it's no longer just the four-wall data center that we're all used to. Now our data center encompasses the dynamic aspect of it, right? The challenges of, not only running our existing environment, everything within the four walls that we talked about earlier, which again is very well established, been around for a long time, but now we're bringing in this dynamic element, right? So not only, do we want to be able to run and manage and control our dynamic aspects with our providers like AWS and Azure, Oracle, whatever I happen to be wanting to use. But I also want to be able to manage other types of environments, like my private clouds, my managed services, things like that. So I have this ability now to go out and say, I have this dynamic transformation going on. So data centers are no longer just the four-walled environment that we're used to seeing here down in the corner, but now it encompasses this whole capability, right? Not only static, but dynamic. The ability to go out and pull resources depending on mission requirements from existing infrastructure to dynamic infrastructure. So we were very used to going to our four-wall data center and helping to set up a secured environment. Right, we could authorize and control who came in and out of our data center, not only the traffic, our IP traffic, et cetera, but physically, right? We could control the doors, we could have access keys, we could say who could come in and could not. Right, all of our networks were trusted, right? And they all interconnected pretty much with ease within the data center, right? There was assumed trust once you got inside the perimeter. Right, so once I got in there, it was like, okay, I can pretty much say who can go where, and I pretty much trust most the environments that are in here. And it was a set of predefined policies, procedures, security environments, et cetera. But the challenge now comes in moving out to that dynamic infrastructure. Like, how do I now apply that same type of methodology? How do I secure and ensure that when I'm deploying in this dynamic world, right, not only on-prem, not only in my physical data center, but out in the dynamic world of my other providers, my cloud providers, my managed services, et cetera, where I don't control the perimeter, I don't control the networks, the switches, I don't even see them, right? They're all services I can dynamically provision. Right, so this whole digital shift, this ability to support, the on-demand resources, and of course, lately here, all the demand for working remotely and accessing remotely has increased the posture, if you will, the screen for attacks there, and the attacks are still coming. Right, so here's just a very, very, very short list of some of the things that have happened. Right, as we move more and more into this dynamic world, again, dynamic both on-prem and in the cloud, hybrid worlds, the ability to protect that becomes a high priority. Right, you can see there was a poll done, and that cybersecurity is really one of the top priorities for most of the IT environments here. And you can see just a list of some of the incursions that have happened. So how do we address this environment? And this is where the concept of zero trust comes from. Right, so zero trust has been around for a little bit now. The concept, the approaches have been talked about, but again, it's one of these things where it's not an overnight. I'm just going to say, I'm going to buy a zero trust product and go. Right, this is really an approach. It's a model. It's an architecture that encompasses multiple different pieces about how we want to set it up. But the real aspect and the core of zero trust is trust nothing. Right, so we are no longer just assuming our four walls, our perimeter environment, our on-prem data center where we can control it. Even inside, we trust nothing. Right, so the concept behind zero trust is now to ensure that everything that happens, the request that happens, the connectivity that happens is authenticated and authorized within the environment. Right, so trust nothing, authorize, and authenticate everything. So if we get into a zero trust, of course, the first place we want to start is a definition. So zero trust can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. It's like back in several years ago, cloud meant a lot of things to a lot of people. So let's hit on a couple of different definitions here. I have them posted here. They'll be in the deck when you get them. But there is a NIST publication that's out there, 800-207, if you have not seen it. It's a zero trust architecture paper by NIST. There's also another one called ACT IAC Zero Trust Project Report. This is the cybersecurity current trends, and that addresses zero trust, right? So basically, and this is, I like the ACT definition here, right? So it's that concept that really anchors on the principle that nothing is to be trusted, right? All interactions between people, data, systems, backends, everything has to be controlled, right? It has to have a security aspect tied to it and control it. And you'll see that theme as we go through here and talk about the implications of what zero trust is and how can we apply it. So from a federal and public sector perspective, if you haven't seen these, you haven't read much on Zero Trust, these are good places to go and good papers to start with, because they lay a nice foundation of a definition of what Zero Trust is, especially when we look at it from a public sector perspective. So a couple of characteristics you're going to see on Zero Trust. Right? These are just some quick bullet points here, but they come very key in our discussions as we go forward here. So Zero Trust, again, is this ability to provide this consistent strategy of users and environments about how they're going to get in and access your applications and your data. Right? So it does assume the posture of never trust anything. Right? That's a key component that needs to be really instilled in what's happening and how we approach things. Never trust, always verify. Right? And this is going to imply different approaches, different methodologies in the way security has been practiced up to now. Right? So Zero Trust is going to introduce different types of approaches, different types of methodology. It's not always technology, right? There's always process and procedure that come into play as well. So everything needs to be authorized, everything needs to be verified, no matter where you are and what you're accessing. The Zero Trust from a networking perspective assumes that the network is untrusted, always hostile. Right? Any kind of threat should be assumed there, whether it's internal or external, and it's never sufficient to assume that once you're in or the locality of your network, in other words, I'm inside the data center, that does not determine the trust level of your network. Right? So every device, every user, every application, every network path needs to be authenticated and authorized. The trust nothing stance. Right? So around Zero Trust and around this whole environment, again, policies and procedures need to change with it as we get this type of methodology adopted. Some considerations when looking at Zero Trust, and this is especially for our public sector environment. Right? Zero Trust is an approach, right? It's an architecture. It's a model, right? There is not a single Zero Trust product, right? So today it's not I'm going to go out and buy a Zero Trust appliance or something and put it in my environment. It's a model, it's an architecture, right? It's an approach to how I want to implement my environment. It doesn't mean you change everything at once. You can do things in an incremental fashion, right? You should also take into account existing practices, policies, tools, and other things you have in place, right? If you have an ICAM system in place, you should be able to incorporate that into your Zero Trust model, right? So your Zero Trust architecture needs to be able to address the trust nothing foundation of what it is, but then it needs to be flexible enough and open enough to integrate with other existing environments that will lend to and support the model, right? So the idea, again, is to be able to bring this capability in an incremental fashion, right? And be able to address policy, process, and procedure as you come into this whole new model, right? And it really wants to go out and take this across an agency perspective, right? So it's not just a specific group or a specific part. Once Zero Trust starts to come into play, it's something that needs to be broadly adopted, right? So from an agency perspective in the public sector, not easy to always roll these things out. But again, this is not always a technology challenge. This is how we're going to protect our environment from a much broader perspective. So undergoing an agency or departmental change needs to be taken into consideration when looking at Zero Trust. So again, if you look at the Zero Trust cybersecurity paper, it outlines a real nice model, right? It's called the 6 Pillars Zero Trust model. So this is a strategic initiative, right? So you take the technology, you take the policies, you take the procedures, and you can bring everything together to incorporate a Zero Trust solution. Right, so you can see a picture of the architecture or the 6 pillars model on the right over there. This is the Zero Trust cap, right? Ostensibly, the whole thing is to be able to underlyingly protect the back-end data, protect your back-end systems, right? And there are really 6 key pillars to this model, right? And that starts with users, and then it goes to devices, your network, your applications, automation around this environment, and analytics. Right, so the 6 key pillars of the Zero Trust model. So as we're going to talk about today are mapping these pillars and really 4 key areas of these pillars into an identity-driven approach using technology and solutions that Hashicorp offers. Right. So the two pillars we're not going to address in the discussion today are automation analytics. Right. So those are tools that you want to be able to take into place, like the analytical capability to go and address what's happened, automation to responses and security threats, the policy procedures you have in places around that. That's not necessarily a technology stack. That's part of the process that you have for monitoring and analyzing, which should be enhanced and brought into the Zero Trust model. We're going to identify here are the four key pillars that address the technological aspects to introduce an identity-driven control posture. So we're mapping the four key elements of the six pillars there into devices, network applications, and users. And really what this comes down to, as you look at it, is a device is basically how do I authenticate and authorize machine level, right, device level. Next is network. How do I ensure that I have machine-to-machine authorization and access protected at the network layer? That's the second pillar. Thirdly, of course, is applications, the workloads, my human-to-machine access. How do I, as a user, get to the back-end systems, back-end workloads, the applications that I need to get to? And then ultimately, again, the users pillar is how do we as humans authenticate and authorize into the environment overall? Right, so the user authentication or human authentication and authorization. And all of this forms the key pillars or the key columns here for how do I switch to an identity-driven control system, right? So this is one of the core aspects, the core characteristics of Zero Trust is we're moving away from the physicality of IPs and route tables and firewalls into identity. Right, so we're going to look at the key aspects of an identity-driven environment. So let's start with machine automation and authentication. How do we help address and solve machines and other types of devices to be able to come in and authenticate into your environment? And for that, Hashicorp has a solution called Vault. So Vault was introduced around 2015, and this really is the ability to go out and securely store, tightly control, manage your sensitive information, right? Anything like tokens and certs and usernames and passwords and keys and all these capabilities that you're going to use to be able to authenticate and identify yourself into a network, right? So Vault, one of the key aspects of Vault is to manage and control not only the secret and sensitive information you're going to have in this hybrid dynamic world, but Vault is also an identity broker. Right, so Vault can issue and understand credentials for not only people, if you access Vault, but primarily machines, right, devices, right, that machine-to-machine authentication. How does a machine go in and authenticate itself to be able to access secrets, to be able to get into and access the applications on the back end? So machine identification becomes critical to this Zero Trust model. HashiCorp Vault provides that fundamental layer for providing machine identification and authorization. So real quickly here, just how Vault works and how does Vault do this. So you can see here, there's a picture. You see Vault in the middle because Vault is this secrets management solution or service that establishes in your hybrid dynamic world. On the top there, you have what Vault refers to as a client, but basically it's a machine or a human. Generally, it's a machine or an application that requests access to a backend, a system or other type of secret, right? So the machine comes in and first it establishes its identity, right? So here I'm a machine, I need to come in and authenticate myself. So we use an authentication engine that's already in place. Because I mentioned before, one of Vault's key characteristics, it's just an identity broker. So Vault is extremely flexible in that it goes out and will integrate with authentication engines you already have in place. Again, a key element of Zero Trust for public sector is the ability to go and be flexible and integrate with systems in place. So Vault will go out and use an authentication engine that's already there. Maybe it's an Okta, maybe it's an LDAP system, Active Directory, whatever. You can go ahead and use those environments, pull that in. Vault will authenticate against that. Will then assign the associated authorization, right, policies around what that machine or what that entity can do, and then returns the necessary tokens that says you are allowed to do this inside the environment, right? These tokens, these secrets, this environment are all short-lived. If you want them, they're controlled. You can revoke them easily. They can have dynamic characteristics to them, so they can only be used once, those kind of things. So lots of flexibility in how you handle that. So core to Vault, again, it's an identity broker secrets management system, provides data encryption across your environment. So if I want to encrypt my data before I write it somewhere, Vault provides that capability, and additional things like advanced data protection. But core to Zero Trust, Vault lays down that foundational level to enable Zero Trust environments because it does identify and manage identities at the machine level. So identity brokering, key aspect. Again, for Vault, you can access and authenticate across different environments. Right? That's the whole idea behind Vault. It supports this dynamic world, on-prem, hybrid, in the cloud, managed service. It doesn't matter. Right? Vault is there to protect that environment and provide identity brokering across them. So again, that ability for Zero Trust in the public sector is to be flexible and integrate across multiple platforms. Vault does that. So really core to Zero Trust is Vault laying down that foundational identity brokering and machine-to-machine access capability. Next, as we move forward here in the pillars, is, I just want to mention before we go off into the next pillar, is for those who can, and those who are able, I mean, this is more of a challenge for public sector and our federal folks, but Vault is also offered as a cloud software as a service. So this is AWS commercial, right? This is commercial offering only, but it is available out there. So it does support push button deployments. It's fully managed environment for you. And it can also be a one cloud, one click workflow. This is commercial and it is available out there today. Hashicorp Cloud Platform Vault. So the next pillar we want to talk about is in our identity driven environment for a Zero Trust solution is networking. How do we do machine to machine access? So we talked about Vault and the Vault's ability to provide authentication at the machine level. Now, how do we do this from a machine-to-machine capability? And for that, we have Console. So Console is a service connectivity, service networking solution across any environment. Hybrid cloud, on-prem, multi-cloud, whatever you need to support. Vault supports this idea of a service-level connectivity across your hybrid multi-world. So key elements of Console. One of the first things it does is it does service discovery and health monitoring. So Vault is aware of your applications and your services that spin up and spin down in its environment. Again, this goes into that dynamic nature we talked about earlier. One of the challenges for public sector and for federal is as we move from the established data centers, established mission workloads, we move into this dynamic world. Capabilities of workloads and services spinning up on demand, being very ephemeral in nature, moving around. So this is what Console does. Console is a service discovery, service registry environment. So Console knows where these services are. It registers them as a central server, and it knows its status, right? What's healthy, what's running, what's not running, and where it's located. The other aspect of Console is it is a full multi-platform service mesh. So Console gives you that ability to, once it knows where all the services now, I can now go out across my hybrid multi-cloud and on-prem world and establish a service mesh, right? So you can see in the picture here, there's several different environments running. I have an Azure, AWS, and Google environment, along with my private environment running as well. I have multiple different services running in there, multiple different applications. Console will allow you to establish the mesh that says where are all those services. Again, it registers them. It knows what's healthy. And then it will allow you to establish service-to-service communication in a secured fashion, right? So Console not only knows where everything is, but it will allow connectivity based on intentions, right? Yes, you can connect, or no, you can't connect in a service mesh with a secured, encrypted connection, mutual TLS connection, right? So this is where you're able to now go out and establish that service-to-service or machine-to-machine connectivity, right? I could have a service running in Azure wanting to connect back to my private cloud here, right? And I can have Console be able to tell me, yes, those services are running, yes, they're healthy, and yes, you have permissions, machine-to-machine, to talk to each other. Right, so another fundamental aspect of Zero Trust, but it also gives you the greater capability that this is a full service mesh. Just a quick mention here, Console also gives the ability to provide what's called network infrastructure automation. Essentially what this does is, since Console is running, Console knows where these services are, right? Part of its capability is it discovers environments. But as you know, from a dynamic perspective, again, from a public sector and federal challenge, this dynamic capability really helps deliver missions quicker. Right? But it also is very difficult to track where everything's running, changing, and going on a moment's notice. But again, IPs are difficult to manage here. They become unscalable, unmanageable. They're very brittle. They're very short-lived. So I want to take this to a service level. So console knows where these services are running. But physically, again, the traffic has to move, right? So console, since it knows where the service is running, it will log those services, the service registry. What it can do is create a template file here that console does dynamically, and then it can automatically go back and update your network infrastructure, right? So this gives the ongoing capability to dynamically update your actual physical network infrastructure, like load balancers and firewalls and things, and change them on the fly, right? So this not only makes it much more efficient and much more simpler and easier and predictable for my network teams to support, but it also increases my security posture, right? So physically, I update my network backends, my network tables, my network firewalls, et cetera, as things change, right? So now my security posture is automatically increased because I'm able to keep up with the changes as new services come online and new traffic and applications run in different places. So console is this foundation cloud network automation environment, right? It's service-to-service connectivity. Console registers all your services, it tracks where they are, and it can establish simply by an intention what can and can't connect to your environment. So it becomes a core aspect of Zero Trust because it provides that service level networking, right? So this is that ability to decouple your environment from the actual underlying IP and drive it from an application to service level. Right? So this gives you a lot more flexibility now to be able to say who can run where and how you can do it. And I can now step it up into this whole ability to say services can talk to services simply by a yes-no intention. And I can now have machine-to-machine connectivity in a secure fashion, and I can drive it based on my identity models. Console integrates directly with Vault, so I can actually pull my certs, I can pull my creds, I can do things on the fly with Vault. That gives my machine authentication. I can have dynamic credentials generated by Vault. I can pass it on to console, and they can be very short-lived. I can establish a connection for a very short period of time, and it's gone, right? So it gives you that identity-based, very ephemeral, very dynamic. So very, very powerful environment for establishing that second pillar for machine to machine. Hashicorp is also, or pardon me, Hashicorp Console is also available as a cloud offering, similar to Vault. HCP Console, again, this is commercial cloud only. So for our public and public sector and federal folks, not everybody's gonna be able to take advantage of this today, but it's similar to Vault. It's one bunch of deployment, all managed for you, and all done inside the AWS commercial cloud. So we talked about Vault having to support a zero trust model in an identity-driven world with machine-to-machine or machine authentication, console with machine-to-machine access control. Now we'll touch a little bit on the user side. This is the fourth pillar of the six-pillar model there for zero trust, and this is about establishing user identity. So we're very familiar with this. This is something that's fairly common today. We have a lot of these methods and processes already in place, whether it's private controlled access in your data center using LDAP or Active Directory, or you're having some kind of a single sign-on solution with an Okta or a Ping out in the cloud. Either way, these are well-established environments for humans to establish identity. So we at Hashicorp, of course, like everything else with zero trust for public sector, one of the key elements is flexibility and agility and the ability to integrate with other tooling to solve that problem. This is one of the things that we do well here at Hashicorp, and we integrate extremely well with all of these tools. Again, it's very flexible, very open for our solutions, and we will use an Okta or a Ping or whatever to provide this identity that you already have in place. So again, reuse what's there, don't reinvent the wheel, and a lot of the solutions we offer will automatically integrate into them. So let's talk about the next challenge, right? The next pillar here, and that's applications. Basically, humans to machines or humans to applications, right? And this is where Boundary comes in. So Boundary is all about simple and secure remote access solutions. So again, we're familiar with this traditional workflow for access into our back end, right? Human to machine access. A user comes in, we want to get into our back end to access a system, a database or something that's back there. So we usually have an SSH key. We want to establish a VPN session. Maybe we have an SSH bastion, etc. This becomes like everything else, there's lots of processes, procedures in place. Onboarding is difficult. It takes ongoing maintenance, ongoing changes, depending on what your security posture is and how it changes today, right? Once you get in, and get past your bastions, get in through your VPN or your tunnel here, get through the firewall, you have access to the back end, right? You're in the network. So you're inside the perimeter. And once you're there, of course, traditionally, you're trusted. So there's always the chance of breaches and other ways of penetrating your environment. We've already heard of such breaches before, like through an air conditioning system and things like that. So you've got to be very careful here, very difficult to manage and control once you get in. And we already mentioned, IPs tend to be brittle in nature, right? They're very well established. Of course, they're still part of the network stack, but they're very difficult to manage, very difficult to maintain, very difficult to scale, very difficult to handle in a dynamic environment. And then, of course, at the back end, there's always the chance of creds being exposed, right? Then we're back to secrets management. We're back to, what are we need to get to? How do we need to get to it? What login information, everything like that could be potentially exposed to others to be able to access different parts of the network, different parts of the system where we don't want them to be. So we want to change this approach. We want a dynamic workflow that's based on identities, right? So now we want to look at saying, let's look at a user, and we want to come in through a trusted identity, right? So this is no longer a VPN. There's no tunnel here. There's no bastions or anything like that we got to worry about. We have a user that logs in with a trusted identity, right? This is establishing an identity with systems that we already have in place. So onboarding is easy, right? This is a known environment. This is a practice environment. This is an identity-based environment. So we're not setting up different types of access points, VPNs and things like that. We're establishing an identity. Right now, I can determine, what I want this identity to do. I can assign, roles and permissions and other things based on the identity and based on access requirements that I want to define. So I can have this type of thing very stabilized, right? I can say who it is, who they are, how they've authenticated, and then I can authorize them in a very straightforward fashion. And then I want to be able to just go out and hit my back end, right? I don't touch the network. Right? I don't physically drill a hole through my VPN, my firewall. Right? I don't have to go through and expose IPs. I don't do any of that stuff. Right? My network remains protected. My network remains private. Right? I am just doing this on a dynamic fashion where my user, based on identity, right, comes in and says, "I want to target a service on the back end." Right? So now I can take the user, I log in, I authorize, I authenticate, then I authorize. And then I select the target, the service or the application I want to connect to, and then a connection is established. A secure connection is established. This is the type of workflow we want to go towards, an identity-based, very dynamic workflow that says, log me in, authenticate and authorize me, and then let me choose my target and go. This is what Boundary solves. Right? So Boundary is this ability to access any system from anywhere, basically, based on identity. So again, you can see the workflow here. A user comes in to Boundary. We then, again, authenticate with an existing provider. This is, again, where Zero Trust comes in, especially for public sector, especially some of the characteristics we talked about. We want to be able to integrate and leverage systems that are already in place. Right? There's no rewriting, no reinventing the wheel, no custom corner thing going on here that says I have a whole private authentication system that you have to maintain. No, use what's already there. Leverage the capabilities that are already in place, that are already well established, that I'm already using in my environment, and integrate them into my identity-based workflow. So that's what Boundary does. I'll go out, similar to Vault in concept, is that I will use identity providers already established. I will then authorize against the environment, right, whatever policies and environments that I am allowed to get to. Those are the hosts and services that I can see. I will then be able to access that back end depending on, again, my authentication and authorization and the privileges. And I can use Vault You can see here, there's Vault. I can do this now and access this based on dynamic environments, right? So I can use Vault in combination with Boundary to establish dynamic credentials, dynamic secrets that says, yes, I'm coming in, I'm logging in, authenticated, authorized. It's a dynamic session. I'm going to connect to my MongoDB here in the back end, and it's dynamic, so it's only good during this session. Right? It's an on-demand or just-in-time type of environment. I do my work, I break the session, I stop it, I shut it down, and all of it goes away. Right? So there's no more exposure. I don't have IPs out there. I don't have anything laying around, nothing residual. The session is gone. Right? The credentials are gone. So there's nothing to go back and rebuild or capture or make exposed for additional access. So again, Boundary, what it really, its primary goals are to go out and provide this on-demand access capability. This is really key for the whole idea behind zero trust, but it needs to be dynamic and it needs to be on demand. So Boundary helps solve that with on-demand access and across dynamic environments. But again, this is one of the key aspects of a zero trust world, and a real challenge for public sector and for federal especially is you want to have these environments that change so much with a lot of security requirements around it. I need to be able to manage that, right? So dynamic environments, constant change, delivering mission apps, when, where needed. How do I handle that? And this is one of the goals of Boundary, right? It has to be easy to use, and of course, everything with Boundary is open source. Very flexible, very open, very integratable with other environments. So this is really what we come across when we're talking about enabling a scalable zero trust solution across these clouds, right? So our model is basically based on the identity aspect of zero trust, right? And that's core to trust nothing, right? So again, zero trust, trust nothing, authenticate and authorize everything. So the technology we talked about here with Vault, Console, and Boundary, take that and apply it in that six-pillar module or six-pillar architecture, right? So now I can lay Vault down. You can give that fundamental identity management, secrets management plane that allows me to do machine-level authentication in a hybrid multi-cloud world. I can use Console to give that machine-to-machine access. Right, force the authentication through identity and who can talk to what based on my service level connectivity. And then lastly, human to machine, right? What services that I want to be able to connect to on demand dynamically based on identity that I can just log in, establish a connection just in time, do the work I need to do, finish my session, and it's gone. Again, a key aspect of zero trust is identity-based, make it short-lived. So these are some of the key aspects and technologies that Hashicorp offers to help really address the security of model of zero trust. So we're looking to build up a zero trust solution. Again, zero trust is not a product. It's a strategic initiative. It's an architecture. It's a methodology to be applied in your environment, right? So especially for public sector and federal, as we mentioned before, it's not just the technology, because that will need to be involved and applied and stood up in the environment, but it's also the people, processes, and policies around it, right? So it's not just a single group. You want to look at it from a departmental and agency level. It's not something you just flip on overnight. It's an incremental process, right? You architecturally want to incorporate the solutions as you go, right? As you move away from the more IP or static-based environment to a full dynamic identity-driven world, right? So that's what we're talking about here in this solution. And Hashicorp is really focused on providing, three of the key 6 pillars of the zero trust model to solve this. Again, Vault to solve the machine authentication and authorization pillar, the devices part of that. Console to solve the networking side, which is the machine-to-machine access. And then lastly, Boundary to solve that human-to-machine access, to establish that dynamic, ephemeral, just-in-time connectivity to a service or a target. Right? And then using the user pillar, that would be to leverage existing capability that's there, like an SSO you might already have in place, like an Okta or a Ping or an LDAP or other types of authentication environments that you have. So Hashicorp is really there to help deliver on the zero trust model, to deliver on the promises and capabilities of a zero trust solution by providing these technologies that are already identity-based, that are already there to deliver security across your environment, across your hybrid environment, across your on-prem environment, across a dynamic enterprise-to-edge type solution. So at the bottom here, there's a link to our Hashicorp Zero Trust Solutions page. Feel free to go out and use that. It's all on the Hashicorp site. A lot of what we just talked about is there for additional information. If you have any questions or would like additional deeper dive details on Vault, Console, or Boundary, please reach out to us. Happy to go into more details about some of the additional functionality capability with these technologies. So yes, they're key to zero trust and helping set up a zero trust solution, an effective dynamic solution that scales to no end here. But there's also lots of other functionality capability here within this technology that brings to bear as we solve the zero trust environment. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your time. We talked about today what zero trust is, some of the characteristics and attitudes around zero trust, but things you got to look at and some of the stuff you got to take into consideration when you stand it up. We talked about technologies that can put in place to help really solve some of the 3 of the 6 key pillars to address how you're going to put up a solution. So thank you for your time. Please let us know if we can help you in the future.
Tim, we have one question.
Yes, Allison.
I just wanted to ask it before we end. How long does it take to create a zero trust environment?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, that's one of those it depends answers. So really it comes down to, again, one of the characteristics we talked about earlier with zero trust is the nice thing is it's incremental, right? So it's not something that you just, buy a product off the shelf or flip a switch and there you have zero trust, right? Because there's lots of elements around it, but really it's an incremental process, right? So from how long does it take? It depends on, again, the technology is there. A lot of the capabilities to lay this down is there. So a lot of folks will start with Vault, for example, to lay that fundamental secrets management identity brokering system, right? So that's going to be key. You got to have a way to be able to introduce identity into your environment and then be able to secure that, right? So Vault does that. So a lot of times when you start off with zero trust, you're going to enter in with laying that foundation down, right? The initial key pillar of that architecture, right? So if I can't establish identity and authentication for my machines, it gets much more difficult to solve this going up the stack. So you generally will start with a foundational aspect like Vault. Again, this can be deployed in a very straightforward fashion. Like everything else, it needs to be planned and thought out for the project, et cetera, to introduce it into the environment, introduce the workflows, et cetera. But that's generally where it starts. And then the introduction of console will generally come next as you introduce the machine capability, right, as more services spin up, now introducing into the architecture. And really it's bringing into the workflow, right? How do I introduce this service networking capability? And again, there's a lot of functionality around both in the Vault and console to integrate into existing environments without modification, right? So if I want to introduce Vault as identity manager, I can have new applications actually call Vault directly to establish an identity, establish secrets, and do those things. But I can also have existing applications call Vault as well without having to modify it, right? Similar kind of thing with console. So I want to be able to introduce these architectures and these technologies and these approaches into my environment, right? Enter where you are, keep the impact as minimal as possible, right? And then introduce the policies and procedures around it as you go, right? And then you bring in the human aspect of it with Boundary, and you incrementally bring these capabilities in, building one off the other, and then expanding the architecture out, and then encompassing the policies and procedures as each of these new environments start to take place, right? The new workflows are in place, the new technology is in place, the architecture and the approach is in place. Now I want to make sure that my people, policy, and process matches the underlying architecture that I have, right? So that comes along as well. And then, you integrate those into your environment with your existing auth engines and things like that. And then, you bring those into your monitoring and analytics, and eventually you'll have a zero trust posture. So the overall time, it could be as fast as you want to make it, or depending on the complexity, it may take a little bit longer. I know that's very nebulous. I wish I could give you an exact number of days, but again, it's really something we can work through and talk in more detail on. But it's very doable, and it's very incremental, and it's very much let's introduce this, and this, and this, and then things come along much faster than you anticipate.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, we had a few other questions come in. What is the visibility? What is the visibility on a zero trust environment, as in stakeholders viewing activities in zero trust? Do these tools allow you to monitor?
So the Hashicorp tools, they provide telemetry and metrics and information like that about what's happening with the tooling. The Hashicorp tooling, like Vault, Console, and Boundary, they track that information, but they are not monitoring tools, right? So that's one of the additional pillars there. I think that was the fifth pillar. So a lot of the automation and inspection tools and things like that you have in place already, you would want to integrate with these tools like Hashicorp, Vault, and Boundary. So you would collect the telemetry, you would collect the metrics that those tools generate, and then aggregate and display them through the tooling you already have in place. Again, the idea is to be able to integrate with existing capability and functionality, and then use it that way. So if you have a data aggregation tool, you have an automated response tool, for a breach or something like that, those are things you actually want to put in place. But Vault, Console, or Boundary are not specifically monitoring tools, right? They collect the data. You can see the telemetry and the transactions and stuff there. Like Vault, for example, you'll be able to go to the audit log and see every transaction that happens. So you can track all that, and then you can gather that data and aggregate it and react to it based on that. But they're not monitoring tools. Those are things that integrate into tools you have.
Okay. Is there a best practice for zero trust solution?
There are best practices, and really what this is going to come down to, there is different types of approaches for zero trust. Again, zero trust is not necessarily a product that you buy, but there are different approaches, different models and things you can put in place based on that 6 pillars that we talked about. So the papers that I showed you, both the NIST paper that was there and the ACT paper, will talk about different models that you can set up and different models that you can approve or move with zero trust. But basically, from a best practice perspective, again, you want to be able to bring these types of solutions to bear that will, give you maximum result with minimal impact. In other words, introduce them in an incremental fashion, like we talked about before. Like, for example, lay down Vault, because that's a fundamental technology, a foundation technology that introduces concepts like identity management, things like that you want to, at the machine level, that you want to bring in, right? So you got to bring that in, introduce that, establish the best practices around using a Vault environment. Right, so that's where those kind of things would come in. So as you bring this in, you establish the technology, you establish the approach, you establish the best practices around it, and then you bring in the next pillar, right, like a console, same methodology there and on up the stack. Right, so all those combined will give you a nice approach to how to build out a zero trust solution or zero trust architecture.
Okay, makes sense. Great. Well, thank you so much for your expertise on all of those questions. As I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar was recorded, and we'll make that recording available on our website after processing. I will send an email to everyone who registered with that recording link. Hope everyone enjoyed today's session and you have a better understanding of zero trust security. Thanks for spending time with us today, and big thank you to Tim for his time. That wraps things up for us. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.